for more on that, we can bring in Emilia Ziosi, a postdoctoral researcher in the Sociology department at the University of Oxford, who specializes in organized crime in Latin America. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation.
This is perhaps a tall order, but can you start by giving us a bit of an overview on how the illegal drug trade works and the Caribbean's role within it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Caribbean has been and still serves as a major transit region for cocaine trafficking, mostly directed to the US or more generally North America, as well as Europe, which today are the largest destination markets for the drug. And the region has been a transit point for cocaine mostly since like the 1980s, more or less. And while its role has within the years diminished as a result of anti-narcotic efforts, especially then in the 2010s, 2015s, it has re-emerged. And we see it now more and more with the role of Europe as a major destination market, with most of the drugs that then reach Europe then pass first by transit countries in the Caribbean.
And do we know why kind of drug activity in the Caribbean has reemerged in recent years?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the key factors is really the emerging role of Europe as a destination market for the drugs. So how it works usually is that drugs from, for example, Colombia, where they're mostly produced, they're passed to the Venezuelan borders, and then from there they are shipped via, for example, fast boats or small boats to Caribbean islands, and then these Caribbean islands, most of which has, for example, like the Dominican Republic, obviously ties through container ships with Europe, as well as direct commercial flights. So that is obviously one of the ways in which this happens. And the Caribbean is also a region where obviously you have fragile state institutions across certain countries, as well as high levels of violence connected very much to firearms, as well as to gang activity. So it is a region that is quite fragile in terms of also, for example, corruption, as well as money laundering. So these are all factors that add up at the time of choosing for traffickers which path to choose when it comes to reaching destination markets.
And how unprecedented is this U.S. approach of carrying out strikes? And do we have any sense at this point of whether it's effective?
It's not the first time that we see it, these strikes. Well, we've seen them throughout the whole month, but we've seen them previously as well, for example, in Honduras. Whether they're effective or not, it depends on what we are looking for. So obviously, one of the main things that interdiction efforts and generally strikes are trying to stop is the trafficking of cocaine. So we can imagine that, for example, more strikes on a certain region, or generally more interdiction on a certain region, are going to be stopping traffickers at least for some time to try and use that region. But then again, it doesn't stop the flow, because what happens is that traffickers usually reorganize and move to different routes, for example, through Central America. And also, we very much need to take into account the collateral harms that strikes can potentially have, for example, on populations in the region.
You've mentioned Europe being one of the main markets for the drugs, for the cocaine coming out of the Caribbean. Is Europe taking any action to try and stem this drug trafficking?
Definitely, yeah. We've seen, for example, in the last year, especially, I think in 2024, there has been a major interdiction of the coast of Martinique, and French authorities were involved. So Europe is very much, for example, in the region, pushing on interdictions, and capacity of law enforcement is very effective in this sense, because it has been seizing a lot of drugs. So that's one of the main things that they're doing. As well as there have been many interdictions across ports in Europe, really, such as Antwerp, but also in Spain.
The Trump administration accuses Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro of leading a drug cartel. Is there any truth to that claim? And can you talk a bit about what the role governments have?
Yeah, that I can't say whether there's any truth in that statement, because that's not for me to judge, obviously. But definitely, what happens is that. Then these accusations and more generally cocaine trafficking very much affect foreign policy and domestic policy. So that are very much pressing issues that need to be taken into account. But I think what really matters here is the stability of the region more than anything. So trying to ensure for people who live in the region stability more than anything.
Can you talk a bit about the consequences of the drug trade for the local population in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, one of the main ones that we can think of, I think, is violence. Clearly, we have seen, for example, surges in violence in Jamaica, but also Trinidad and Tobago in the last year. But what we can also envision is, for example, rising levels of corruptions. Some of these countries already perform badly in the corruption index of Transparency International, and these can also be obviously aggravated by, for example, money laundering in the region. Another probably less visible consequence is, for example, environmental impact that this can have. So we've seen in Honduras, for example, a lot of deforestation connected to drug trafficking, but other impacts can be, for example, in the long run, obviously it's more likely that consumption will rise in these countries, and also collateral harm of strikes, for example, for populations such as, for example, people who are caught in crossfires and fishing vessels, and on the local economy then are very much also impacts that need to be taken into account.
Emilia Ziosi, thank you again so much for your insight today. We're going to have to leave it there. That's Emilia Ziosi, a postdoctoral researcher in the Sociology department at the University of Oxford, specializing in organized crime in Latin America.